Thank you. Can we start? All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us for this event. So today we have a very special event. Yeah, it's also very special for us because it's the first time that the Center of Competence on Humanitarian Negotiations participates at the Geneva Peace Week. So thank you very much to the Geneva Peace Week for giving us this opportunity. Today we'll be talking about humanitarian negotiations under pressure. Well, as probably most of you know, although IHL really guarantees access for relief to civilians affected by armed conflict and guarantees that parties to the armed conflict allow unimpeded passage of humanitarian relief, often access to these populations really depend on the competence of humanitarian staff in negotiating access. Yeah? It depends on their ability to negotiate and engage with parties to armed conflict and convince them of the humanitarian character of their operations. And as you also know, humanitarian work is mostly in armed conflict during active hostilities, which means that frontline humanitarian negotiators often work in complex environments, in where there is a lot of pressure and a lot of stress from the ongoing violence. And not just that, what adds even a layer of complexity is the humanitarian imperative, the urgency of needs, which means that humanitarian negotiators often negotiate under tremendous pressure. And I'd like to thank our panelists for being here today. We are very lucky to have them. They are three senior humanitarian negotiators: Pascal Hunt from Icrc, Julie Dunphy from UNHCR, and Mehmet Balchi from Fight for Humanity. They all have tremendous long-term experience in frontline humanitarian negotiators, and they have been too kind to give us this opportunity today and share some of their experience with us. So first of all, I'd like to say a few words about the Center of Competence on Humanitarian Negotiations. It's been created in 2016 as a strategic partnership between the Icrc, UNHCR, Doctors Without Borders or Médecins Sans Frontières, Center for Humanitarian Dialogue and the World Food Programme to promote a methodological approach to humanitarian negotiations. Negotiations as a soft skill for humanitarian staff has often been overlooked, although it has been, as we discussed, essential for the ability of humanitarian organizations to access populations affected by armed conflict. And the fact that the CCHN has been created by these 5 agencies is a recognition of this important skill. And CCHN has been mandated to do 4 things. First of all, capture and analyze frontline negotiation experiences. Second, develop negotiation tools and methods. and you can find some of those on our website. Third thing is to mobilize the community of practice around issues of common interest. And when I talk about community of practice, I mean the community of practice of frontline humanitarian negotiators. And fourth, provide peer-to-peer advisory services on live negotiations. And recently, the CCHN contributed to a mobilization effort on this specific topic, negotiating under pressure, where we organized a retreat nearby in Caux, above Montreux, with more than 25 negotiators, experienced negotiators, on dealing and coping mechanisms related to negotiating under pressure, and looking at specific methodologies on negotiating under pressure. And today is an opportunity to look at that from a frontline perspective. So, Pascal Hund, thank you for being here with us. Pascal Hund, you joined the ICRC in 1995, and you've held several positions in Rwanda, DRC, Congo-Brazzaville, Afghanistan, and Central Asia. You were head of delegation a couple of times, yeah, in Somalia, Jordan, Sudan, Afghanistan. And from 2012 to 2018, you were the head of the assistance division in Geneva, overseeing teams of experts, ICRC programs in the domain of health, economic security, water and habitat, and weapon contamination. And currently, you are a crisis manager at the ICRC, Director of Operations. So my guess is that you're quite familiar with that topic.
Let's see.
All right. So you will be sharing with us a story about a negotiation you've been involved in while you were with the ICRC, with a range of parties to armed conflict. Correct?
Yes, correct. Good afternoon. And first, as you said, I think negotiation is really at the heart of humanitarian action, because here in Geneva, we believe that as soon as you speak about IHL, neutrality and impartiality, everyone will agree on that. But the reality in the field is slightly different, and we really have to engage and discuss with a vast range of interlocutors just to ensure and get our license to operate on a daily basis, not only about our security, but really about the conduct of our operation and making sure that really the principled humanitarian action is being respected. And as you can imagine, this is not an easy task for our teams in the field. But with this type of history, the ICRC has track record in discussing and engaging with a vast range of interlocutors, from government to non-state armed groups. And as I speak, we roughly engage on a yearly basis with 400 non-state armed groups around the globe. So the small anecdote I will give you happened once upon a time in a country affected by many non-international armed conflict or internal conflict, with front lines, a very fluid situation, front lines moving quite rapidly. And one day there were foreign workers working for the government, and during the night the front line moved and they ended up on the other side, which of course created a huge embarrassment for the host government, for the non-state armed group, and for many countries. And this negotiation, or roughly this intermediation, was about to take these foreign workers back home or transfer them to a third country. The process lasted quite a while, more than 3 weeks, with many stakeholders having quite a significant amount of distrust among themselves, to say the least. They did not agree on anything at the beginning, although it seems to be quite simple. And those people were staying in a besieged area where you had massive humanitarian problems. So the role of the ICRC was to approach all the parties and to ensure that we would be able to play the role of neutral intermediary between all of them and bring them safe back to a third country outside them. The pressure was quite intense on the diplomatic front, as you can imagine. On the humanitarian front as well, because the health condition of these people was deteriorating on a daily basis. And we had to negotiate a vast range of issues, from temporary ceasefire to overflight clearances, security guarantees, and so on. So it lasted for 3 weeks. The outcome was quite positive. So we managed to bring them outside safely, all of them. But at the same time, we also wanted to, play our role and provide some humanitarian aid to that besieged area. And we were confronted with a bit of an ethical dilemma when we were, at one stage, forced to choose between the foreign workers and the victims of the conflict on the ground. And we had to make a really tough decision, either to lose everything or at least to free or to help these people to go back to their country. And we have decided at that time that it was better maybe at least to get these 30 people out and try the days after to again gain access to this area and then bring humanitarian assistance. So this was a bit the story in short.
Thank you very much. Fascinating. Of course, it represents the type of choices that frontline negotiators do have to make on a daily basis. This balance that they have to strike between pragmatism and principles. And my question to you, Pascal, is the following. How were you able to make that decision? What was really at stake for you, and how did you see your impact on the lives of the people affected by armed conflict?
When you enter in such a negotiation, you have to be ready from the beginning for long negotiation. It's always better to be ready for long processes than for short one. Mentally, you prepare yourself differently. You organize yourself differently. You organize your teams differently, because I had people going and negotiating on our behalf in many countries, as you can imagine. You have to be ready to be confronted with extremely difficult choices, to be confronted with ethical dilemma, when you know that the solution that you will bring will always be the best of the worst one. You have to know your interlocutors, your stakeholders. You have to understand their interests. So that's why it is so important to engage with parties to a given conflict, even if there is no such type of negotiation beforehand. You have to understand their interest. You have to understand whether there is maybe a common interest among all of them. So this is a long process, and it's better to be prepared in advance than to be confronted to tough choices at the last minute. It's always better to know or make sure about what are the terms of the negotiation. Improvisation sometimes is good, but sometimes is a bit risky as well. And you have to, there are choices that you just can't make alone, so you have a team with you, you have an headquarter with you, and this type of ethical dilemma, if you share that with colleagues, saying, okay, I have basically the choice between 30 people that are about to die, and I have a few dozens of thousands that are also about to die, but I have limited option for the time being, so I have to make a choice. These are the type of, the more open you are with the team and within the organization about the ethical nature of the dilemma, the easiest it will be to deal with them. That's not a recipe per se, but a small trick maybe.
Yeah. And you were in a leadership position during that negotiation. How did you cope with the level of stress you were subjected to?
When you are prepared for a long negotiation, you know that it will not last, on a 24-hour basis, and you know that you will have extremely precious time before peaks of tension, and you have just to be ready to enjoy that, to take care about yourself, about your team, to think about something else, just that you keep some, gas and energy for yourself, because when really the intense phase is coming, that you just have to dedicate your energy just for that, and this can last 1, 2, 3 hours. And then after, it's even good that you force yourself to just clean your brain, get outside, think about something else, and get ready for the next phase.
Thank you. So if you could give us a few lessons learned from that experience, what would they be?
The importance of training, you know, get prepared before the negotiation. Extremely dangerous to, when life is at stake there, I mean, better not to improvise. It's good to have a good team with you, well organized, roles and responsibilities well defined before. If you have the luxury of sharing your experience with other organizations, with other negotiators, this would be extremely useful because, you know, we have certain ways of negotiating within the ICRC, but I'm sure we can learn from WFP, MSF and others. And this is extremely useful. And as we had recently a retreat in Co, where we have professional negotiators coming to us, you know, the guys that are involved in hostage, in kidnapping, in extortion, this type of professional negotiator, I mean, they can also bring some good lessons for us as well.
Thank you very much, Pascal. Fascinating. I'd like now to move to Julie Dunphy. Julie Dunphy is also a member of CCHN's Community of Practice. She has over 30 years of security experience with almost 20 years in international humanitarian security, ranging from field postings in emergency and high-risk environments, which include Bosnia, East Timor, Afghanistan, Nepal, Liberia, and Sri Lanka. And during the last decade, she has held security management positions based at the UNHCR headquarters in Geneva, involved in the strengthening and professionalization of security management for her organization and the UN security management system as a whole, in addition to managing and responding to critical security incidents. Thank you for being here, Julie. Julie, you're going to be sharing with us a story from your experience about negotiating a returns case, a refugee returns case, with a military actor.
That's correct. Thanks, Karim, and thanks to everyone for having me here today. I've been negotiating actually much longer. I've been negotiating since a child. My mother tells stories about how instead of throwing a tantrum when I wanted something, I would actually be nice. I would come and give her a drawing, or I would propose in the supermarket that we should buy something for Daddy. Daddy would be tired. And likewise, I would use the same strategy on my father to promote my mother so that we would look nice after being out for a day. I developed a different strategy when I was a teenager. If I wanted to go out with friends on a weekend night, I would have my friends call up and ask my parents whether I could go out, that, you know, they were going out, they had organized lifts and so on and so forth. So that was the way I would strategize. So I've had to do it in different ways over the many years. In my professional career, it's changed. You know, I've had situations where initially I felt perhaps I wasn't prepared, but time pressure was on. I've had cases where I've had to deal with people who were trying to self-harm. I have had situations whereby I have tried to persuade people to make a complaint, to make a report, to help others, that they would not be alone. And I had to use a lot of persuading mechanisms because time was of the essence if we didn't obtain their statements and forensic evidence. So I've had to do a lot in terms of negotiating, persuading people, making sure that it is in their interests. So I developed it not just for my interests over the years, but for other people's interests. As Karim mentioned, I work for UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. We currently, for those of you who may not be that familiar with UNHCR, we provide support to over 70 million people who are forced to flee and who are displaced globally. So, as you can imagine, our mandate is to protect these people. And what that means is, again, making sure that they have the respect for the rights of the individual in accordance with the letter and spirit of relevant bodies of law. That's human rights law, international humanitarian law, which Karim spoke about earlier on, and refugee law. So, of course, when we put that down into practical terms, what we're really talking about is ensuring the physical safety, the freedom of movement for people, that they have access to the basic things that we all take for granted: shelter, water, food, we want to make sure that they have rights to education, to health. So this is, in a nutshell, what the organization does. But I think what is important is that we try to seek solutions for these people. Now, ultimately, the ideal solution for everyone, of course, is to return home, to return back to their village, to their place of origin, to their town, to their community, where their connection is. That's what they want to do. Sometimes people assume that refugees all want to be resettled, but in fact, less than 1% of people are actually resettled. So the numbers are very low. People really do want to return home, and that is the ideal solution. We also, however, look at local integration. For many refugees, they may not actually be able to return home. We have many situations that are long-time protracted refugee situations. And in these instances, people may want to stay in that area. So there are a few dilemmas with all this. We do have to try and make sure that people return in safety and dignity. And sometimes different governments will have strategies to say, the conflict is finished, we now need to provide support, and we need to look at this, whether it is a plan that is developed that will give the people who are going to return this safe and dignified return, that they will have access to be able to restart their lives, that they will have access to their homes, that they will have access to schools, that these facilities will be built and will be there for the long term. So we want to make sure it's a sustainable return. And that's a little bit what I'm going to talk about today. As Karim has mentioned, my role is primarily in security, so I'm going to talk a little bit about my role as a security advisor when I was in the field. And my role was really to make sure that we went through a security risk management process to make sure that the areas and the situations that we are operating within, and as have already been mentioned, we operate in many areas where there is conflict, in many areas where there are security challenges. So my role is really to do a risk management of the security environment, to assess whether it is safe both for UNHCR workforce, for partner workforce, so the operating partners that UNHCR has out there, and also for the returns themselves. Is there going to be any security challenges? Are they going to be faced and have infiltration from combatants in an area? Are they going to be, is there going to be extortion rackets if they're living in a camp situation? What are the challenges, generally in a security environment? So this is, in a nutshell, what I have been doing. So the situation that I want to talk about is a return situation whereby the government announced a plan for 100,000 people who are going to be returned within a 2-week period. Now that's a considerable amount of people. That's a large town for many of us. So you can imagine it's an area where there had been heavy fighting, where there had been conflict ongoing for several years. So nobody had been to this part of the country in several years, and yet now it was going to be a return operation where all these people were going to be put on buses, and transported to the area, and we were then, as the humanitarian community, supposed to go in and help them re-establish their lives. So I was asked to go in and conduct an assessment of the area, and one of my first ports of call when I'm doing this is, of course, to meet the law enforcement agencies and the security forces. And there was a heavy military presence in the area because it was not that long ago since the non-state armed groups, that the combatants had apparently been moved from this area. So again, the government had claimed that they were all gone, that the area was safe, but was this really the case? So I go and I meet the military commander, which is a challenge for me in some locations where they're not used to having women as security officers, but we work through that. But what I found out in my first meeting was that the security forces were actually the ones who were going to implement the plan. Now, for those of you who are not overly familiar with military hierarchical structures, when the military are given a task, particularly by a ministry, they will carry out that to the letter of the law and the letter of the government, and it will be an absolutely brilliant plan because they're very good at planning. It's what the military do. However, does it actually meet all the requirements? Were they thinking through some of the challenges that we as humanitarian community would see? And this was what I had to try and talk through with them. Now, what I knew, of course, about the area was that there had been heavy fighting, there had been artillery fire, there had been landmines, there was reports of housing that had been booby-trapped. And the first question then related to that I asked was, well, has this area actually gone through a demining process? How have you managed that? Is there explosive remnants of war lying around in the area? And they looked at me and said, well, we haven't had time to do that. We don't have the capacity to do that. You know, understandably so. They were still in a conflict zone in other parts of the country. So how were we going to now address this? They said they didn't have time for clearance, that they would try and clear the area, that they would talk to some of their commanders and they would try to clear the area after the people had returned. Well, this was not going to be a very good idea if people were going to go back to their homes and then find some type of an artillery strapped to a door, or they were going to find, a shell in the garden that hadn't detonated, or somebody was going to walk on a personnel mine. They weren't going to be able to start harvesting their lands, planting crops, if the area was mined. They couldn't even have cattle, so their livelihood was going to be impacted. Everything about them was going to be impacted if this area was not properly cleared. What did I have to do in that? Well, again, it's an additional dilemma. I could have gone back and written a report and said, hey, this is not safe for us to return, we shouldn't go in. We as the humanitarian community cannot support this. But how would that impact our relationship with the government? We had to think of that. Now, we don't just think of it in terms of relationship with the government, but we were very much thinking of it from the perspective of, we can't support this return operation. The challenge, however, with that was we also had to try and help the people because, again, I couldn't go back to that battalion commander and say, you need to go and tell your bosses that this isn't going to work. So I spent the next couple of weeks talking to, and the next few days actually, going to talk to battalion commanders, lieutenant colonels, brigade commanders, colonels, divisional commanders, generals, and so on and so forth. And in the meantime, we were trying to negotiate, and other people within the office were talking to district authorities, to line ministries, as well as, of course, that at the capital level, our representative was engaged with talking with the respective ministries, and so on and so forth. So it was a joint approach. We had to have a strategic plan in place to try and make sure within the short time frame, how were we going to move this forward. Now, what we did was, of course, they gave us some leverage and they did agree that, okay, well, we'll slow down, we'll phase the return. We will go in, we will clear part of the area so that one village can return, and then we will continue it in that phase. For anybody who's familiar with demining operations, this can take some considerable time. And time was a pressure, so we had to call in the experts, demining organizations, to try and help and assist and use their technical expertise to talk about this. We managed to get some areas cleared. We managed to get in humanitarian demining teams. Some of them were moved from other parts of the country. Additional ones were brought in from outside the country. And we managed to get the technical capability required to start it. And that was how we had to approach it. It was difficult. It's not easy to do, particularly, the government didn't want to lose face. But we had to make sure that this was going to be a sustainable return for people. If I'm thinking of it in terms of, the challenges where we went out and how I personally, moved some of that forward, and particularly within the time frames, part of it was to adopt a strategy whereby I was actually saying to the different commanders, please come out with me, to the local authorities, please come out with me. Let's go to these villages. Let's see if these are safe for return ourselves. So again, my second week of the negotiation was spent on the road, and for the weeks after, where I was trying to bring officials who would not normally go to these areas. I had to put painstaking efforts in going out. Sometimes I think that week I certainly tested some of my 9 lives. I think I was probably already down to 6 or 7 at that stage. I probably lost another 2 or 3 because I certainly went into fields, I went into houses, and I was finding devices. I have had a lot of mine awareness training, so before you think that I was not practicing, I've done a couple of weeks courses on mine awareness training before. So I certainly would not let any of the other colleagues go down that road. So let me stress that. But I also, it was just a way of me trying to demonstrate that the area wasn't safe. So again, you know, there was a lot of effort into it to engage with all the different stakeholders and keep the dialogue going at all different levels so that we could ensure that the return happened. It did. We managed. We certainly had a very much a phased approach. It was slowed down. So the government was able to say, you know, 100 people returned to the village. They had that fanfare for the first part. But after that, then there was very much a slowed down, and it actually took probably over a year to a year and a half after that I'd actually left the operation before the entire area was returned. So it was a successful negotiation. Yeah, I think I'll stop there. I'm sure there's other opportunities.
Thank you very much, Julie. Fascinating. My question is to you. So this is a really stark reminder of the types of challenges and dilemmas that we witness, or that refugee populations, returning refugee populations witness. And it's also very relevant to the current humanitarian challenges we are facing as a result of armed conflict in the Middle East and Asia that is causing major displacements of populations and movement of populations in general. So how do you see the role of CCHN's community of practice in terms of transferring this knowledge, these lessons learned, to the wider community?
So I think the good thing, and I've recently had the opportunity to participate in 2 of the CCHN events. I think for me, the relevance of it is really that you are thinking about it collectively from the outset. As I say, you know, initially when I've gone into these situations, you think you're alone. You think you have to go in and negotiate. But I think the beauty of the model and the tools developed by CCHN allows the operation and not just your own organization to look at it and develop a plan based on the tools, but it also you know, enables you to have effective engagement with other people. Because as I outlined in my example, it wasn't just me doing this alone. It wasn't just the office doing it alone. It was, you know, we were going beyond. We were using other expertise. We were using other people within UN entities and other people within partner organizations who would have contact. So I think for me, you know, if I go through the CCHN tools and the dialogue, you know, that I would see, you know, I think, you know, the tools for me is really looking at the context, examining that thoroughly and making sure that if you are going in to negotiate, you really understand the context and you understand, you know, the stakeholders. I think we always talk about stakeholder mapping and knowing who our partner is, but we need to know how we can leverage and how we can support them as well to leverage with others, because sometimes I think we forget that. I think, you know, for me, the typology, as I've, you know, was preparing for this, I thought, did I use this? Were we actually using the typologies? Were we using the technical level, the professional level, and looking at it from a political level? Because that's what we have to do in any negotiation strategy. And so I think very much then understanding, knowing your counterparts, knowing their position, as well as you having a clear position for negotiation, I think really will help you. And I think working through these tools and the strategies that CCHN has had and in more detail, I think is really effective, because often we don't take the time out. The other thing for me that the CCHN courses offers is the fact that we actually do a lessons learned. We often, as humanitarians, we go from one crisis, so to speak, to another. We always seem to be dealing with one emergency after another. We never have time to stop and think, and I think the CCHN and the courses and the community of practice gives you that time to actually think, reflect on how you have actually managed to do negotiations and to share best practices and lessons learned. And I think it's only through that that we all can work better and be better at our roles and our jobs. So yeah, I think that's it. Thanks, Kareem.
Thank you very much, Julie. I'd like to move on to Mr. Mehmet Balci. So first of all, I'd like to thank the Geneva Peace Week Committee for giving us the opportunity to collaborate with Mohammed and his colleagues from Fight for Humanity. It's the first time that CCHN collaborates with your organization, and we hope there will be other opportunities in the future to work together as well. So, Mehmet, you have worked on humanitarian negotiations with non-state armed groups in the Middle East and Latin America with the NGO Geneva Call between 2000 and 2019. You have managed to obtain dozens of humanitarian commitments from armed non-state actors on the protection of children, banning sexual violence and anti-personnel landmines. You've also worked on the inclusion of humanitarian issues in the peace negotiation agendas in Colombia. And you've also developed and led programs promoting IHL norms to protect civilians' rights. And today you'll be sharing with us a story from your work on a negotiation with a non-state armed group that has been quite prominent in the media recently. Correct? All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for your attendance. Indeed, while my colleagues were speaking, I was thinking to reshape my intervention as an advantage. I was trying to understand, to be a very big organization like Icrc or part of UNHCR, I be part of a small NGO. What is the comparative advantage? Because often when you are part of a small organization, you have to do everything. You have to buy your ticket, you have to contact the people, you have to do analysis, you have to rent a car. So you have to do everything. You have to be aware of everything. This is an advantage. But at the same time, this is a lot of stress. It's a lot of time consuming, it's taking your energy, so you are not concentrating sometimes on the real issue. So this is, but at the same time, you are not very visible, you are not known, you are taking less risk if you are part of the UN, if you are part of the Icrc, maybe Icrc, so that you can be more easy target for armed non-state actors or for other actors who are different plans. In my case, I worked for many years, as Karim said, for a small NGO, the Geneva Call, a small, medium NGO, let's say, but very mobile. So we could take really easy decisions, and then sometimes, for years, we had really no security plans. So we were moving around without security plans. We are using our instinct. We are relying on the people's information. So I can say with the year we have learned that we need security plans. We need to be more. So yes, and then we become more complicated. And then I have to call DSS to say how is the situation, the last situation. Then I go to Icrc office to ask them what. So it become more and more to rely on the security plan of other colleagues, which was good. And I'm not blaming anybody. I think we have learned during the time how you can. We were working without a lot of without knowledge. It was less stressful. But when you are aware about the risk, you are also stressful. But sometimes you can mitigate the risk. So my plan is really is important to analyze the risk and mitigate them. This is I think is very important. You are in the field. You are humanitarian. You take the risk. There are many risks. Not only risk coming from the armed groups. It's a risk in the road. Risk to be in the you go to Bogota. In Bogota, the risk is not really ALN, FARC, or paramilitaries. It's criminal. criminality. How do you really move around in Bogota? Where do you go? What are the no-go areas in Bogota, for example? So these have to, then, of course, these are in the retro perspective. You analyze it, or there was a lot of maybe during the action you feel less stress. You feel really, but you in retro perspective you say, oh, what I did was really wrong. I could have problems. So you try to analyze in order not to repeat them. While coming to the negotiation with the armed groups, I don't call it really negotiation. I don't think I was a negotiator. So this is more we were advocacy. We were doing more raising awareness to make them aware, or try to give these incentives or to the armed groups why they should respect. What are the long-term impact of their behavior on their for their community or for their future in the after the conflict. But so we were in general we are doing this work. Of course, it's humanitarian. We want them to not to use landmines, not to children, to prohibit sexual violence. Of course, this is has no political agenda. It's a humanitarian work, but we are not giving something in exchange. We are not okay. You release, I give you $50,000 or no $100,000, or you. So we were just trying to make them aware of the consequence of their behavior. So ideas to they change their behavior. So they respect, they understand the norms and they respect them, or they respect civilians basically. So this is, therefore I don't really call myself a humanitarian negotiator, but a humanitarian advocacy officer. Because say in this, I can qualify myself in regarding the concrete case of maybe that the story I wanted to share with you is related to, I won't be too much, I will contextualize, maybe it's better to understand what I'm trying to say. It's about Syria. It's related to Syria, is our work with the Syrian armed groups. In one hand, we are dealing with the Syrian, the Free Syrian Army or Islamic factions, and on the other hand, dealing with the Kurdish factions. So we were working with everybody. There was no, wherever we could go. I want to add something here in bracket. When we say, oh, we are negotiating with armed groups, I have worked for 20 years with armed groups. Believe me, I spent 10% of my time with armed groups. The rest of the time I spent with the governments, with other stakeholders to explain my work, to get access, to say, okay, because when you say, oh, I'm going to work with armed groups, or we would like to conduct training. No, what training? What are you going to do? What kind of training? They will never listen to you. You will give them political legitimacy. So you are considered a political actor, that you are supporting them. So you have to explain this again and again. Your interlocutors, you have to explain to your donors, you have to explain to the media, you have to explain to everybody that you are not doing a political work. You are doing, this is your way to influence the armed groups. So often armed groups are more often than the people who are surrounding the armed groups. So you have to negotiate more with other actors than the armed groups itself. That I can say clearly, because armed groups, okay, you go and you negotiate. They listen to you, or you explain to them. They like or they don't like. But but now if I go to Yemen to discuss with the Houthis, believe me, I have to spend hours and months to get access to the Houthis. So this is, in this case, when we started working with the Kurdish groups in northeast Syria, the YPG, the first time we had to negotiate for 1 year, really, to get access to the northeast Syria. Because there were problems between the Kurds of Iraq and the Kurds of Syria, and especially for our work, we were considered as political work. We were not allowed to cross, because if you are humanitarian work, I will bring water, I will bring the shelter, I will bring. Okay, this is more concrete. They know where they go. But when you say I'm going to train to raise awareness, this is no. Wait, this is not urgent. So you have to really negotiate. We had to negotiate this access for our months to get there. So when you go there, you don't know if when will be the next time, because we are not in the field. We do work in and out, and then you try to reach the maximum objective you can. with the armed groups. So this is also another pressure indeed on you, because you are there after several months, and then you try to in a half day or 1 day to negotiate all issues and try to, this is always not good. I mean, this is really not, is not fruitful. Then you, of course, you have to come back, or if you are not in our case. Anyhow, and then you, again, other, in between, the situation changed, access is difficult, then, second time happened after 8 months. We were there in October. My colleague Anki is here. We were together in October. The second time we went there in June. So, and then, of course, after our talk with the group has discussed internally what we are looking for. So they were ready to continue the dialogue. Okay, we had the second meeting. So at the time, they were ready to even make commitments. They say we are ready to make a commitment on the landmines, not to use any more anti-personnel landmines, or we are ready to commit to ban sexual violence. We are also ready to sign a commitment to ban use of children below 18. So again, it's very, very stressful. Shall we accept this commitment or not? Shall they sign or not? Because we are not sure if they are ready to commit, really, to respect their commitment. Because otherwise we could have been used by the group that say, okay, they sign, but then they don't respect it, because there were a lot of media intentions, hundreds of them correspond that this group is going to sign commitments. So it's good for us, visibility, of course, it's good for us, this engagement, they are signing this commitment, but we were very, very stressful for us to accept the one on the children. The children one, because we know to whom we are talking, we know their practice, we know their past, we know there will be difficulties to not respect this commitment straight 18 years old. So therefore we accepted the two commitments and not accepted the third one. We say, okay, we come back to discuss again. You discuss well internally, we will discuss internally. So they were ready to sign a commitment for straight 18 years old, but we didn't accept. Second time when we went there, they signed with a reservation. 16 and 17 years old can be members, not combatants. But we accepted, but at the same time, it's very stressful for us, because in one hand, we wanted to get this signed, because we know there are a lot of children below 18 are used. They can benefit from the commitment. But at the same time, if you had not accepted, so somehow we were given the, let's say, green light to them to continue to use the children. In this case, we accepted really deliberately these reservations with, that children 18 cannot be members, cannot be combatants, but can be members. And the day after, they show up with 100 kids released. She said, okay, these are the kids we just separated, we handed over to you. Take care of them. Okay, this is the, what do you do now? So we work with them, they separate the kids, and you are there, you are not prepared to receive these kids. They are not international organizations, they're interested, but they're to deal with 100 kids and to reintegrate them in their families or case management, nothing was ready. Nothing was ready. But still, at that time, still in the ongoing discussion, I think it was a good decision that we have signed, they released the children. What happened to the children, another story, is a long story. But we had accepted this commitment and the release of the children. And then I was not a child specialist, not child protection, not child reintegration. Okay, we haven't even know about the standards of the reintegration. But the fact that children are separated, not in the front line, they are in some houses waiting to be reintegrated. So we were run after the organizations. Save the Children, Icrc, not Icrc, to be honest, Icrc, UNICEF. But nobody was ready, because it's not in their strategy. They didn't know about it, why they should come jump in like this. I just finished. So, but still, I will finish. I can accept questions. We stopped. We accepted children. Children stay in the houses. Thanks to the Swiss government, we had some funding to give some food, hire teachers, to general education. For 2 years, we have dealt with these children in these houses. Most of them went home. Some of them, they didn't know where to go. They were coming in the waiting room. Some of them rejoined the group. But during this, they mobilized, thanks to the commitment, about 200 children. But without really any standards of integration. The children just went home, and they were. So I can be accused or not blamed or that not having worked with the standards. It's true. We haven't really. There was no organization. We were not ready. But still, we saved, I think, more than hundreds of the life of these children integrated in their families. It was all stressful. Are we respect the standards? Are we really manipulated? Are the children really used in these houses to be reintegrated? At the end, I can, with my conscience, I say it was good work, good job, stressful, but we saved the lives. So I think this is my story, but is there another aspect of these stories, of course, is still ongoing. Then I worked, then the second phase, just to finish, then United Nations came in 2 years ago, said, okay, we want to engage SDF. Because with constant observation, and they will sign an action plan straight 18. Fine, we had prepared the ground. Now they can engage in the group and for and commitment straight 18. So I was also involved in this process until right now I am involved in this process. Then I will not talk about this process, but it's the contrary this time. With a lot of standards, a lot of preparations. The group is ready to release the children, but the partners are not ready to receive these children. Which one was the best story? I don't know.
Mehmet Belchi, thank you very much for this candid testimony on some of your experience in negotiating respect for the protection of children and children's rights with non-state armed groups. You said that you relied on instinct, heavily in your work when negotiating with non-state armed groups. Did you, although obviously your instinct proved to be quite a resource, important resource for you, did you at times feel ill-equipped and not having the right tools and methods in terms of analysis, planning, and implementing your negotiation process?
Yeah, of course. In retrospect, when I started in 2000 and then today, after 20 years, of course, I think that we were not very professional. You can be more efficient if you had all these tools. So then with the time, we were equipped with the tools, with the experience, we learned from other actors. So we had also analyzed our own experiences. So of course, then our instinct is not enough. Of course, instinct is good. Instinct is not enough. You have, I mean, I personally, since I'm telling about the story, because I worked in a country where I was aware of the situation even before joining Geneva Call. I know about ALN, I know about the FARC, I was very much interested in the Colombian peace process in the past. So, for example, I am Kurdish origin, I come from the Kurdish, from this area, I know who is more or less who is who. This helped me a lot to move around in this context. I didn't really need to be trained by others so I know who is in the PKK, who is who in the YPG, who is who in the Kurdish. So I know who is the right person to talk to. And then we were not really, so this helped a lot. But at the same time, there were a lot of aspects were not prepared, but we are using our instinct, common sense, that we should go ahead. So sometimes you need really, you go to Colombia, you go to Nariño or Pasto in the Ecuador border, but you have planned your activities, you want to go, and last night something had happened, you have to understand what you do. Who is really there? You need to know the situation, what happened. But then I will not call the UN and they says, oh, what do you think? They are not ready, they haven't analyzed. But I have to take a decision in 2 hours. I'm not going to, so therefore you have to take the decision, and then you have to use your instinct as well. So I hadn't really had big problems. We had some problems, but not really big. But we took some risk. But so far it went well. In my case, at least, I don't suggest to do everybody like this. But I did, but it worked. But it's not always the best way.
So we invite you to have a look at some of the tools and methods that we've developed at CCHN.
Definitely.
They cover analysis, planning, and implementation of humanitarian negotiation processes, and they are based on experiences such as yours that were successful. Although you didn't have the necessary tools or methods to work with, they were successful, and based on these type of experiences, we've developed our tools and methods. So thank you very much, Mohamed Belshi. I'd like to open the floor for questions and answers. We have a couple of minutes left for that. So please, if you have questions, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name's Catherine Kramer. I'm a former colleague of Mendo's. I'm a former colleague of Mendo's